Hello and welcome to Senior to Senior, where folks from our town interview other Harpswell seniors so we get to know each other better and celebrate Harpswell's eclectic older population. Today I'm welcoming Ed Robinson back to do part 2 of his series, From Where on Earth Does My Seafood Come? Ed and his wife Mary live here in Harpswell. He's had a long career working in the pharmaceutical industry, and two of the companies he worked for are now leaders in producing COVID-19 vaccines. Ed also has done extensive research on where our food comes from. Welcome again, Ed.
Thank you, Gail. If you tuned in to the first section, you heard me talk about some of the challenges in the ocean, changes in fishing practices, and some of the issues around seafood. Most of our seafood today is imported. Much of it comes from Southeast Asia, where there are issues with the preparation of that seafood and the inspection of that seafood coming into the United States. Now I'm going to take you a little bit further into the seafood market. One of the key species is the wild salmon. We all love to eat salmon. It's a delicious food. It's very healthy. It has a good mouth feel, as they describe it. But unfortunately, we love salmon too much. And the wild population of salmon has declined dramatically, both on the west coast of the United States and Canada, but particularly on the east coast of North America and then the west coast of Europe. The Atlantic salmon is listed as endangered, and it's probably critically endangered at this point. Estimates have been made that within the next 10 years, if we don't make dramatic changes in the way we fish, in the dams in our rivers, the availability of fish ladders and so on, that the Atlantic salmon could actually be extinct, which would be a terrible loss for the world. In Alaska and the west coast of Canada, they've worked very hard to limit the decline of their salmon species, the coho, the chinook, the sockeye, and so on. And farming of salmon has taken off because the demand for salmon remains very high. And while salmon is a very efficient way of growing, salmon farming is a very efficient way of growing this protein, it does have some negative impacts. It can cause the spread of disease in the ocean to wild fish and parasites as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about this. Atlantic salmon farming began in Norway in the 1960s. It was a fairly rudimentary business at first. They were using cages and nets to control the salmon. But the technology has progressed dramatically, and today it's a huge business in many parts of the world. Scotland, Ireland, Chile, Canada, Maine, and New Zealand are some of the leaders in the world market for salmon farming. This is by far the #1 farmed fish globally. The market is well over $10 billion a year just for salmon. There's a farm now in Vancouver that's growing salmon on land, indoors. And there are 2 of these planned in Maine. I'm sure you've read about them in the paper or seen reference to these projects on television. But this is a really encouraging opportunity, both because it would create a lot of jobs in Maine, but it could be environmentally more attractive for farming than doing all of that in the ocean. This chart just gives you an idea of the growth in aqua farming of all of the salmon. It's not just salmon, but also rainbow trout. And as you can see, it's been really dramatic. The potential is probably 5 to 10 times higher than this because people love to eat these fish. But for that kind of growth to take place, it will have to be done on land. And there's some economic challenges for that, but the industry is making tremendous progress there. So the question arises, do I eat farmed salmon? We all love the look and the taste of wild salmon, but if we're over consuming wild salmon, we need to look at farm salmon. And the good news is it's good for you. Farm salmon grow at about 2 times the rate of a wild salmon. This is because of selective breeding, much as we've done with chickens and turkeys and pigs and cattle. The other thing is that we're now using feeds that do not use so much of the forage fish population, particularly anchovies, that have been a huge part of the aqua feed or fish feed business historically. When salmon farming began in Norway in the 1960s, it took about 5 pounds of fish meal, fish feed, to grow a pound of salmon. But they're far more efficient now than they were. You can see the ratio is now down to 1.3 pounds of feed to create 1 pound of salmon. That's one of the most efficient protein generation technologies out there. Some people are concerned about antibiotics and other chemicals in their feed. But the good news is that in Norway and most places, they have not used antibiotics in many, many years. And that's based on consumer demand and regulation. One of the nice things about farm salmon is it's very consistent in its taste, texture, size of the fish or the fillet, and the fat content. And the aqua farmers work very hard to do that because as consumers, we like to know the product that we're getting is the same as the product we enjoyed previously. With wild salmon, as with any wild seafood, you cannot say that. The variability in ocean temperature, water quality, food availability does cause wild seafood to vary considerably. One of the good news stories about farm salmon is that it may have higher omega-3 content, so that makes it even healthier for us. In recent years, there's been a lot of discussion about a new type of salmon called Aqua Advantage, and this has been approved by the Food and Drug Administration after a 20-year process of reviewing this. These salmon are genetically modified to overexpress a growth promoter in their bodies. They grow at twice the rate of the farm salmon currently used in the industry, and they use 25% less feed. Those are really significant numbers. The company that developed this is called Aqua Bounty. They're located in Prince Edward Island, Canada. But of course, a lot of people are not interested in genetically modified foods, even though a very large percentage of the foods we buy in the grocery store today have genetic modifications to them, whether it's fruit that have been grown with modifications to the trees, cheese, all kinds of things have been modified by farmers over thousands of years. But this Aqua Advantage salmon has not proven popular to date. Some of these stores listed here or restaurants have said that they will not stock it. Personally, I would eat it, and I think it would be good for our environment and for world health if people did eat it over time. Shrimp, one of the most popular seafoods out there, and one we buy in pretty large numbers, about 4 pounds per person per year on average, 3 times the amount of shrimp that we ate going back to 1980. Over 90% of shrimp today is farmed, and the very large majority of that comes from Southeast Asia. But as I said before, only 1% of that seafood is tested when it's brought into this country. Unfortunately, water quality is a major issue in a lot of those countries. And if you've ever traveled to that part of the world, you know that their rivers, their lakes, their canals and things are treated like waste dumps. I've seen things in China that would put me off seafood forever. But a lot of people don't know that when they go to the store and buy the cheapest shrimp that they can find. It's really not a good decision in terms of your health or the health of our oceans. They use antibiotics in some of these countries, and they use other drugs to fight disease. 16% of the shrimp samples tested by Consumer Reports had bacterial infections that were hazardous to human health. So if you're going to buy shrimp, I strongly recommend that you consider either wild shrimp that's harvested in the Gulf of Mexico, for instance, or it's farm salmon from US sources. It's going to cost you a little bit more money, but it's going to be far healthier for you and for our environment. The focus on shrimp in China historically has been quantity, produce as much as possible, not on the quality. And there's no doubt that they have substandard water quality feed, a lot of disease and inbreeding of those shrimp. And historically, they have overused chemicals and antibiotics. But there's an interesting thing happening in China now. Their exports have dropped considerably, and their importation of shrimp has risen dramatically. And guess what? They're introducing shrimp from the United States to China. So we are having an impact on their practices and their diet. Hopefully other countries will begin to make adjustments in the way they produce and eat shrimp. Tuna is another seafood category where there have been significant issues. And again, I suspect most people don't realize this. The top 3 tuna suppliers to the United States are Chicken of the Sea, Bumblebee, and Charlie the Tuna. We all love those old ads. But those companies are owned by foreign businesses, the top 2 by a Thai company, the third by a Korean company. The yellowfin tuna population is stable globally, but bluefin are threatened, as I mentioned before. Unfortunately, the business practices in the tuna industry are not good. These leading tuna companies have all paid settlements to settle charges of price fixing and other bad actions. And so, we need to be aware of whom we're supporting with our dollars. And if we have a choice to buy seafood from people that are more responsible, putting out safer food for us. So there are some trends in the seafood market, and most of these I think are good news. The reality is the consumers are becoming better informed, and they're asking better questions. When you go to the counter at Hannaford's, ask where that seafood came from. How was it prepared? How old is it? We've had situations where people were harvesting wild salmon in Russia, air freighting that salmon to China for processing. They actually inject water and stabilizing chemicals into that salmon, and then the salmon is air freighted to the United States. That's not sustainable seafood production. It's really harmful to the environment to process food in that manner. A lot of people, particularly younger folks now, are very focused on sustainability. Where does their food come from? How is it produced? And is it safe to eat? In Maine, there's a big movement now to local and regional sourcing of food. You'll see all kinds of restaurants and stores labeling their food as coming from Maine farmers or produced in New England. And this is a really positive trend, as opposed to shipping food thousands and thousands of miles around the world. Traceability is important too. People want to know where their seafood came from, and the ability to trace it all the way back to the nursery or the eggs that are used to produce seafood. Nowadays, that information is increasingly being disclosed and tracked. And this transparency, allowing consumers to know things just like we know information about our drugs, it's really important, and it puts more pressure on the seafood industry to improve their practices in support of us and the environment. There's now a certification called the Marine Stewardship Council certification. You'll see this on packages of seafood, MSC certified. It's something to look for. Going back to Monterey Bay Aquarium and their Seafood Watch program, you can go online or get pamphlets from them that give you advice on what type of food to buy, what's healthiest for you and the environment. And they list what are the best choices in green. Shellfish, like oysters, for instance, or clams from Maine, US farmed shrimp, and albacore tuna. That's a sustainable population currently. Also, good alternatives or okay to buy would be bluefish, snapper and squid from the United States harvest. And then they also list those things that we should be avoiding. Obviously sharks. A lot of people know that sharks have been over harvested, really cruelly treated. In Southeast Asia, they harvest shrimps just for their fins, and then they throw the carcasses back into the ocean. That's just a shocking abuse of those creatures. And Seafood Watch is recommending that you avoid imported shrimp and bluefin tuna. On the green list, those things that are really healthy for us and really healthy for the ocean environment. They're low in mercury, they have a lot of omega-3s, and therefore we should be eating more of them. Mackerel, coho salmon, sardines, they used to be incredibly popular. As Alaskan salmon, wild salmon is still sustainable, particularly the sockeye salmon. And then the albacore, black cod, or sablefish. If you go into Shaw's, you may find a wide range of seafood. I remember going in a few years ago when I put this presentation together originally, and they were advertising sustainable tilapia. And I said, well, where is that tilapia from? And they said, it's from Peru. I said, that doesn't sound very sustainable to me if you can buy tilapia from producers in New York, for instance, or Kentucky or Canada. So these are just some examples of where different seafood is originating from in Shaw's. This was just a point in time. If you go in today, the list will differ. But I encourage you to ask and look at the signs. Here's what I saw in Hannaford's at that time. The first time I went into Hannaford's, they didn't have any Maine salmon, even though we have salmon farms off the coast of Maine and New Brunswick. Nowadays, you're more likely to find Maine-produced salmon in our local supermarkets. Clams, scallops, haddock, it's great to see Maine products in these supermarkets, even though the buying decisions are made in places like Pennsylvania or Texas for these retail stores. If you go in and you ask questions, you express your preferences, tell them what you'd like to see in the stores, you can influence the stocking decisions that they make and end up with more choices of good, local, high quality seafood. So, educate yourself. I hope this stimulates you to read and ask questions and learn more about the products you eat. Ask questions of the people supplying you, whether it's a restaurant or a supermarket. Try new species. There's a tremendous amount of variability out there in seafood, and much of it is very good for you and very inexpensive compared to salmon, for instance, that is not an inexpensive product. When you have a choice, buy local, regional, support our fishermen. It's not an easy industry, and there's been a lot of change, a lot of hardship in the industry. So if we can support them, the oyster farmers, clammers, people growing mussels, we're really doing a lot of good for our area. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation, and it's been a pleasure talking with you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Ed. I've seen one of your presentations before, and I still learned a lot. Appreciate you coming onto this show and sharing your knowledge. We'd like to give special thanks to Harpswell Community TV and to the Health and Wellness Committee of Harpswell Aging at Home for sponsoring the program. If you would like to interview someone or you'd like to be interviewed, please mail ha@ha community to let us know. That's HAH@HAH.community. Thank you.